All right, welcome everybody to, I guess, just the DW Hangout in Discord and now YouTube. All right, in regards to just kind of where things are, where things stand this week. Um, Last week we did go through and we had a very, very bullish close, being a hammer doji. The one thing that is slightly concerning is that the hammer doji itself, while being a bullish candle in and of itself, it did technically close below the long-legged doji from the week prior. Now, this would technically, if this wick 100% didn't exist and it was just the body of the candle closing below this, then at that point in time, it is a stronger case for a bearish scenario to go through and play out. Now, I do think, going through and looking at all of this, even with last week's, really bullish momentum starting off this week really strong, there are going to be a few key things that I think are going to be really important to go through and kind of watch to see how this week unfolds. Because technically we do have mixed signals here. One being technically we did get a bearish confirmation with the way that this candle closed, but this candle in and of itself is an extremely bullish candle that has gone through and since driven us up past the prior all-time high with where things currently stand. Okay, so with that being said, the two things I would really pay attention to would be as follows. One would be how price comes through and actually behaves coming into either a back test with the prior all-time high, and or if the momentum can go through and continue, how price would potentially go through and if it can get back above and potentially put in a new all-time high, flipping the prior all-time high into support. Now, depending on what all happens through here, the reason why I'm saying I would still remain relatively cautious, even though, currently with where things stand, we do have a pretty bullish candle from last week that could go through and continue to drive markets higher. The key thing here is really just going to be if we can either, if we do come back to test the prior all-time high from this breakout, is if we can hold it as support, or if this ends up potentially being a lower high formation from what we had gone through and formed over here. Meaning, yes, this was our high, this was then our low. Is this just a higher low on a longer term time frame? This would be something like if you zoomed out either on like the daily or whatever. So this would basically be a little bit more clear here, being that, yes, we had our high, a low. Is this then just a higher low? Or I'm sorry, a lower high before potentially continuing a downtrend? Or if we do back test the prior all-time high, can we hold it as support, potentially coming back through, building more confidence for price to then come through and challenge the new all-time high? Now, with that being said, again, I do think this is going to be very, very critical with where things currently stand, for what we are looking at. Now, if we can go through short term, go through and potentially claim a new all-time high this week, I would still very, very heavily argue that the $75,000 to $81,000 level is going to be extremely critical to go through, watch, and pay attention to with how price is basically going to go through and react. And I know that this is a larger range, a larger area to just kind of keep an eye on. But again, this is basically the diminishing factor that we've been following from cycle to cycle, dating back all the way from when Bitcoin was very first around, literally going through, measuring the bottom to the peak, dividing by a little under 5.4, gives the basically it predicts the next cycle rally. Same thing, bottom to the top, divide by 5.4. You end up having the exact same thing from, cycle to cycle to then that's basically what ends up bringing us here. Now, essentially that 5.4 is essentially just a range that kind of gives us overall targets with a little bit, kind of forgiveness towards the up and towards the downside. And that's basically what brings us to that 75 to $81,000 level. But anyhow, definitely key areas to go through, keep an eye out, see what all is going to go through and happen. And especially when we go through and we zoom in a little bit just for this week, how is this essentially going to go through and unfold? Are we going to go through and see a back test of the prior all-time high? Again, we can go through, deviate below it, but as long as we're holding it as support, I think that gives more momentum for bullish continuation. But if we end up going through and we start holding this level as support, if price comes back through and starts holding it as resistance at that point in time, failing to maintain it as support, then at that point in time, again, I think on longer time frames, daily time frames, and so on, this could potentially be the formation of just a lower high, potentially meaning that we would come through and take out the low that we potentially formed over here, thus maybe even completing a 20% drawdown, or potentially seeing a deeper pullback. We'd really kind of have to wait and see from there. So far this cycle, we have averaged about a 20% pullback. So again, the one thing I would kind of ask is, is the 17.5% drawdown that we saw, is it enough, or do we potentially just need one more kind of shakeout back test, basically that 20% area, before continuing on into new all-time high territory? So definitely just worth keeping an eye on. Those are some of the key things that I'm really paying attention to for this week, specifically in regards to Bitcoin. Outside of that, we'll go ahead and look a little bit at ETH BTC, because it's as well kind of at a pretty crucial juncture, just kind of with where things stand, being that it has been now back at the current range lows. I would definitely keep an eye on this. Again, I want to see one of two things. We've talked about this to pretty great extent, just kind of with where things stand. But I want to see one of two things when it comes to ETH BTC. More bullish, short term, I'd want to see either a break of this macro descending channel to where we go through and we start flipping that into support, for then Ethereum to go back through and challenge basically the range highs that it's been stuck in now for many years. Or I'd want to see potentially a capitulation style event where ETH BTC potentially comes through and bleeds down to, maybe 0.045, maybe 0.04, before then going through and continuing on back higher. This, again, to me, this would basically be kind of like a final shakeout kind of move, a what would you call it? A depression phase for the most part in an overall cycle. And then, from there, I think ETH BTC would then likely, continue on back towards the upside. One of these two scenarios, I think, marks the beginning of a broader altcoin season as a whole. It would either be on the breakout of basically this descending channel, or basically once this overall bottoming formation, if it ends up going through and potentially happening or happens, then at that point in time, I would argue most altcoins would have likely bottomed against their Bitcoin pair. And if they haven't, they'd probably be extremely close to bottoming. Meaning that for the most part, with where things would be in the cycle, those altcoins for the most part would likely experience much greater returns when compared to Bitcoin. And then obviously, as the cycle goes through and progresses, you can take profits potentially in, dollars or back to Bitcoin, all of that kind of stuff. So definitely key to kind of watch there for ETH BTC. After that, Ethereum, pretty much very similar situation to what we saw with Bitcoin, even looking at it on the weekly time frame. The biggest difference here was just that it did not have the more bearish long-legged doji that it had, or that Bitcoin had gone through and had. It was still a pretty indecisive candle overall, but this last week it did actually see a hammer doji as well. So again, still relatively bullish regarding just kind of where things currently stand, given the overall environment that we do kind of find ourselves in. But it is something that I would just kind of urge caution, kind of overall, just kind of given where things are and what all is happening. Um, I do think that just kind of with what we've been seeing, I think that it's possible, you know, Ethereum here specifically will likely go through and continue to perform well. And again, if Bitcoin goes through and it decides that it wants to move in an aggressive manner towards the upside, I think Ethereum would likely just lag behind, um, basically the same way that it has been. Which again, this is kind of further iterated with the ETH BTC chart. While Bitcoin's been going through putting in new all-time highs, and just constantly ripping towards the upside, Ethereum has not been able to keep pace with it, and is in fact bled back, back to Bitcoin to a much larger degree, to the point to where I think that, especially being that we are at range lows, if Bitcoin goes through and potentially goes back into price discovery mode and starts ripping towards the upside, that could be the event, even if Ethereum is gaining on the dollar, that could knock ETH BTC down basically to a capitulation style level before ultimately finding kind of more of a secure local high for Bitcoin, that it then goes through and potentially either stables out. But then at that point in time, that would be likely the time that Ethereum flips the table and then greatly outperforms Bitcoin during that phase. Again, thus marking kind of the beginning of a much broader altcoin season as a whole, a true altcoin season. After that, we'll go ahead and just kind of touch base a little bit on some of the different altcoins that we like to talk about. We like Paal. Paal so far looks still pretty good, bouncing off the midpoint of its own ascending channel. Um, did see a pretty strong bounce from there, but so far outside of that, it is kind of struggling at the current range highs that were basically established over here. So with that being said, I would definitely keep an eye on what all is happening with Paal. I don't know why the line came out not very clear. There we go. Um, but so far, this would basically be the level that I would want to see Paal go through and potentially break up above, flip this into support, and then at that point in time, I think it's only a matter of time before it probably comes into contact again with the top of the ascending channel. And who knows, maybe after that we see kind of a breakout from there, kind of entering more into a more sustained parabolic phase. Now, is it possible that Paal could potentially be kind of experiencing something like what we saw back over here, where yes, it did go through, it came up, it contacted the upper bound of the ascending channel, but then for the most part, it just kind of chilled out. It ranged out for a while. It's possible we could be kind of in a similar phase here, where Paal, for the most part, just kind of chills, hangs out for a little bit, maybe then actually does revisit the lower band of the ascending channel, but for the most part, it could maybe just be right around about the same price as this local low, maybe a little bit lower, meaning it could potentially hit it sooner. But either way, I would still be extremely bullish on Paal, expecting it to eventually go back through and ultimately either test the upper bound of the ascending channel or break into some of our more cycle long targets, being in between that $3 to $9. So yeah, Paal looks great. XAI as well. This one as well. Last week, maybe actually the week prior. I don't remember exactly, but I pointed it out on the timeline, especially when it was at the lower bound of the ascending channel that we have here for XAI. Um, and so far, really nice recovery from what we've seen from there. XAI is in the process of trying to go through and hold 123 as support. This was basically the highs that we had established over here, so this is a critical level in my mind that would determine whether we can go back through and start pushing on towards not just challenging basically the current highs that we've gone through and established, but also potentially challenging the other side of its ascending channel and potentially moving on from there. Um, Vanry, geez, oh man, Vinar chain. This thing has been an absolute monster, absolute monster. I do think that pretty soon, in probably the next few weeks or so, maybe months, but we'll probably go through and start challenging the dollar territory and beyond. Here, it'll take some time, and we need some time for these things to play out, especially after we see large impulsive moves toward the upside. We generally see a period of consolidation before basically the next time we would see something like that. So it's possible we spend a few weeks or so kind of chilling out between 20-30 cents or so before potentially ultimately coming on into the next leg higher from there. Um, track Track more recently did also see a pretty solid back test of basically around that dollar level. I would like to see this continue to go through and hold. And I do think that Track as well, this is probably going to be one that will go through over time and take out its prior cycle's all-time high. But again, this will just take time to go through and play out. Um, Outside of that, honestly, Link has been slow, but Link is one that I do think that probably in a similar position to where just kind of Ethereum is, the way that it has gone through and lagged for the most part this cycle. I do think that Link is probably a sleeper right now, and that for instance, once Ethereum goes through and confidently breaks out or capitulates against Bitcoin, then at that point in time, Link will likely go through and very quickly gain ground. And probably, I do think it's possible we see $100 Link this cycle. It is well within the cards, well within the possibilities for Link to do something like that. And again, it's not like I'm trying to call for an outrageous price target of like $1,000 or more. Even going through pulling on the Fibonacci bands as soon as, yeah, here we go. And we pop this over onto the weekly time frame. $100 right now is just a little bit above the upper bound of the highest risk for this. And last cycle, the Link did go through and exceed. Obviously, it did go through and go beyond that as the cycle had gone through, it carried on, reaching multiples on top of when it had reached kind of the highest risk. So again, I think that even when we look at it from a mathematical side of the equation, $100 is well within the possibility for Link to go through and potentially see. Jupiter as well. This is one that I think will likely go through and continue to do extremely well for this cycle, especially all of the activity that we see on Solana. So I would expect Jupiter to go through and likely continue to do well for this cycle. Even going through and we look at some of its own risk bands for the most part, do we see something potentially, between a 7-15 dollar Jupiter? I do think that it's possible, especially just kind of given just where things are. Again, I like using the Fib MAs more so on something like a weekly time frame because you're able to get just a lot more data into them. But for the most part, with a newer altcoin that will likely go through and do well, we can look at it on shorter time frames and kind of get an idea as far as what could potentially be some pretty significant levels with where things currently stand. Outside of that, we'll talk real quick meme tokens because why not? Pepe, I think Pepe will do well. I think that it probably needs time to kind of cool off a little bit, especially after the move that we saw a few weeks ago. Just absolutely massive 330% move in a single week. So I do think that Pepe might just need a little bit of time to kind of cool off, but I do think that it probably will see another move, another larger move, impulsive move towards the upside. And outside of that, I think I'll probably just end this stream just by saying howdy. And win $1, because why not? Howdy. So, all right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully you found some of this informative. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll do my best to try and get back to you as soon as I possibly can. So have a great rest of your day, night, morning, whatever it is that you're doing. Howdy, have fun. Have a good night. Thanks.